begin with my presentation, I would like to share with you some of the information, the background information of myself. And I'm a business professor. I'm teaching human resource management at school at Yong-Seung University in Seoul, Korea. And that means I'm not an expert in the field of education, but I'm a professor who happens to carry out this paradigm shift mission in my own field of study, which is business education. So my presentation is something about my own experience with this changing paradigm of business education called responsible management education for the last 7 or 8 years. So again, I'm very pleased to share with you my experience and what I'm thinking about the learning and educational process for the 21st century, the era, very drastically changing era that we are living in today. Okay, let me begin with my presentation, a little bit about the history of our university, Yong-Seung University. And and the very photo that I would like to share with you on this PowerPoint slide is from 1965. And these gentlemen in this black and white photo are the university presidents from worldwide. And that time, this is Trinity College of Oxford University in 1965. And in the front row, there's an Asian. He's the very founder of our university, Dr. Yong-Seung. And quite interesting to me, the keynote speaker of this gathering, 1965, was historian Arnold Toynbee. And he made a speech about the sort of the mission of higher education in this coming new era. During the 60s, man sent to moon and this technological breakthrough and atomic bomb we mentioned about yesterday, and all these technological advancements, what Toynbee noted, quite interestingly, is very similar to Einstein's notion. Without having soul in technological advancement, it is a curse. That's what Arnold Toynbee mentioned in his first speech in this gathering. And then how can we lead the whole world, the whole society into the right direction? Can government do that? No. Can business do that? No. Even though I'm a business professor, realistic speaking, it's not very possible, at least at this stage, but not my students, I hope. But Arnold Toynbee's notion, the final notion was that academia, higher education, should lead all this into the right direction. So maybe that's the dimension of higher education in this coming new era. So that that reminds me from the last, yesterday's discussion. So in Yong-Seung, and this slide represents a statement made by the Dr. Cho, the founder of our university, during this very gathering, the first IAUP, International Association of University Presidents Conference. And he said that, indeed, the signs of times tell us that the age of cooperation has come. So we are moving into this globalized world. And the speed and intensity and scope and everything of globalizing today is no comparison to this 60s year. Those era during the 60s. And we are moving into this new age of cooperation in globalized world. And the only feasible way in which we can improve the world situation is to enter into the gate of common prosperity on the basis of enlightened self-interest. Enlightened self-interest. So by making society happy, healthy, by making ecological system healthy and healthy, I can be happy and healthy too. So this is self-interest notion, but enlightened version of self-interest notion. And what he said in this the first gathering of IAUP represents the very founding spirit of Yong-Seung University, and he noted that the academia, the higher education in particular, should pursue academic excellence, technological breakthrough, and technological advancement, and so on. But at the same time, that pillar should be balanced with this global consciousness, conscious mindset. So that's what he thought during the 60s, and that remained as the philosophy of our education, our university. History went on, and during these 50 years, actually last May, in Oxford, back to Oxford, we will celebrate the 50th anniversary of this IAUP, and then we are carrying on the spirit of this the purposeful or conscious higher education, and during these 50 years, and for example, academic impact, UN academic impact was the child of this IAUP. And UN academic impact, those of you may know, is sort of comparable organization to UN Global Compact. Global Compact is about the business world and their social responsibility to the world, and UN academic impact is about academia, their social responsibility toward the world. Okay, so that's a little bit of background of my university, and within this university's philosophy, I've been doing my own version of, the new paradigm of business education for the last 7 or 8 years ago. Okay, our session, it is about learning and education process, and I would like to take this framework as my discussion. And by the way, this is the series of themes presented by UNESCO Report on Future Education. And they suggest these 4 pillars of education in order to be effective education. Learning to know, learning to do, learning to be, and learning to live together. And learning to know and learning to do is sort of the traditional, so to speak, paradigm. It's the basic of education. Let them be knowledgeable about the skills and so on. But this learning to be and learning to live together is sort of the agenda of education for this coming new era, so to speak. And actually, the first report, UNESCO report on learning to be, was published in the year of 1972. And that 1972 is quite interestingly, that 1972 is the year when Claude Rome's report on limits to growth published it, the same 1972. And then after all these years, we start talking about these reports again in this new era. And 1996, another report from the UNESCO, when we are moving into the 21st century, the title of the report, I guess, is Learning from Within. I think this is continuing discussion of the learning to be, and they're talking about learning to live together. And that makes sense. Only those persons who know to be, being, self, revealing its own self, he or she can live together. He or she can be able to construct a mutual, interdependent community. And that's the sort of the educational agenda we need to touch on these days, I think. So my talk will be based on these two, the third and fourth pillars, which drastically contrast to the earlier 2 pillars. And that's learning to be and learning to live together. So first, learning to be. So in this, interdependent community, and the connectiveness is the norm. We are moving into the year when the interconnectedness is the norm. The first starting point is learning to be. And when it comes to learning to be, I think the very essence of learning to be, understanding learning to be, is the construct of the consciousness. And maybe different versions of definition might be there about consciousness, but I think consciousness, being conscious, requires two dimensions of awareness. And the first question is the question of who we are, the mission, ontological purpose, and so on and so forth. And I think this is very basic for all the remaining stuff. And only those who are conscious about his or her own mission and purpose, they can be conscious about the second dimension, and that is about the impact, justice to the world. Are we making our behavior in the most righteous way? So it's a question of impact and justice. So these two dimensions are interrelated, and it's the very basics of consciousness and toward the path toward the education of learning to be, I guess. Well, being self, I would like to share with you this moment with the Abraham Maslow's work towards psychology of being. And in this great book, he talks about this meaning of self-actualization and being and self, and he lists these characteristics of self-actualization. Well, it may take some time, but let me read this list of the characters of self-actualization, because I think it's a very great questions that we might want to touch upon. How can I apply this to my management education? First, those self-actualized persons, the characteristics of those self-actualization, the first, the list says superior perception of reality. Superior perception of the reality. Yeah. And that is actually these parentheses and italic letters are originally from this Maslow's work. And only those persons who are very perceptive of reality, it could be authentic, less influenced by idealization. And this goes on. Increased self-acceptance of self, of others, and nature. And it all starts with self. Self and others and nature. And I think it nicely represents the ecological way of looking at the world and the life that we talked about yesterday. If there could be one subject in education, life. Okay, and the list says increased problem centering, removing self from the equation and not interested in being a hero. It's transcendent state from the egoistic level. Greater freshness of appreciation and richness of emotional reactions. It's about art and love. Increased identification with the human species, identity, and more democratic character structure, genuine sense of equality and fairness. And it all starts with finding its own value, his or her own value, self, actualizing self. That's the whole starting point. And greatly increased creativity. So for Maslow, creativity comes from self-awareness, self-actualization. And me as a business professor, I know that corporate world is conducting research on how and why creativity comes from. Yeah? Where does creativity come from? And they want the personnel, the human resource with creativity. And Maslow's notion was that creativity simply comes from the self-actualization. And I know that Stefan will talk about that tomorrow's session, right? So we are very much looking forward to it. And also the value system, changing paradigm in value system. Value shifted from materialistic, narcissistic influences to other-centered influence. So if we were talking about the educational agenda learning to be, the grand question, I think it's a very grand question, it's a very challenging question. Can we actually implement something in our classroom to develop the character of students into this direction? Obviously, the hard knowledge, like the marketing knowledge and managerial accounting knowledge and so on and so forth, that's basic. But this, on top of that, this character is very necessary, but it's not an easy task, I guess. But when it comes to learning to be, maybe the list of the agenda in terms of the process of educational learning might include this: self-awareness, awareness of others, cultural empathy, and globality. Globality is, well, English is not my mother tongue, but globality is the emerging sort of new terminology in this era of sustainable development. And the globality, from my colleague's definition, it's about an emotional, spiritual, and aesthetic sense of the globe. And yes, that is another, the character of the student that we might want to raise. Principled decision making. I think principled decision making, that might be the reason why value in education, value of values in education matter. Social responsibility and ecological sustainability. And again, it all starts with consciousness. And learning to live together. It's about, the understanding of others, of their history, their tradition, their spirituality. It's openness to others. And again, it all starts with openness toward yourself, his own self. So learning to be is about being independent, from dependent to independent. This learning to live together is about to be interdependent and building community. And another way of saying that is, I guess, global citizenship and responsibility. How can we do this? Again, it's a very difficult question and challenging question and so on. And I would like to suggest the three dimensions of this transformational. It's a transformation, not simple change. A transformation model. I suggest people, which means professors, because it all starts with professors, I think, and also pedagogy, teaching methodology, and also research methodology, adjusting to this new dimension of education and learning. And then, finally, it's about organization. It's institution, business school, and university. So university level and business school level institutional change. And again, all of these issues are not easy and not simple thing to do. Professors themselves should become, I guess, conscious. So when it comes to the classroom and doing the research, and he might want to ask the question of who you are and are we making right direction, into the right direction. And the concept of learning and education might be drastically changing as well, and from planned learning to emerging learning. So the role of professor is not just top-down kind of lecturer, but he should become a facilitator of learning. And I know that in the field of education, this notion of structuralism in education, and these days project-based learning and problem-based learning, all this kind of new pedagogy might be applied to this kind of dimension of learning. Well, I think value of values in learning is important. And stakeholder participation. Students should participate, and also corporate world should participate. NGO will make the learning program the sensible and useful. And professors should become the referent power-based leaders. Referent power-based leaders means professors should lead their lives, into this kind of direction in the conscious manner as possible. Not just a technician to deliver the knowledge to the students and so on and so forth. He or she should live a life himself.
following that motion. Okay, pedagogy. Again, I mean, I'm learning this a lot these days. Emerging knowledge and experiential learning is getting more and more important. And transdisciplinary approach, I guess it's different from multidisciplinary or interdisciplinary. It's transdisciplinary approach. And also from traditional hypothesis testing to sense-making exploration is sort of the new direction. Traditional hypothesis testing. So we talked about this, with Stefan yesterday. If economists, and how come economists could not forecast financial crisis during the later years of 2000? We need to be away from hypothesis testing to the open exploratory approach. Okay, and a holistic system approach, integrated approach. In my field of management education, even inside the management education, marketing, human resources, accounting and finance, all these, functional expertise in the management educations are all siloed, on their own. For example, for marketing research, the very important variable is customer satisfaction, for example. And it is so obvious that customer satisfaction actually comes from employee satisfaction. But marketing professors mostly do not touch upon that link, because employee satisfaction is the area of human resource management, and customer satisfaction is the area of marketing, So holistic system approach might be the way to go. And then the institution, organization. To me, it's the most challenging the issue. So university and business school, whatever the function, major study area might be, the purpose, vision of organization should be on the same line into this direction. So for that said, I think Kyung University is fortunate, because as I mentioned, 1965, IAUP, our university philosophy is based on that kind of direction. So it's very fortunate for me to work in the business school and carry on this responsible management education within this university system with that philosophy. I hope that my university president watching this video, but I'm not sure. I don't. Okay. All right. And then the change in institution, organization change. So curriculum and all the policies should be fitted with this vision and philosophy. I think it's very important. Every programs and curriculum should be coherent to your value and purpose, the business school and so on. And multi-stakeholder participation, again, open system approach, university, multi-stakeholder approach, the corporate world, the NGO, and international, the organization. We all need the collaboration. That collaboration, global collaboration is important, getting more and more important, especially in the era of sustainable development. And I think, as Toynbee noted, academia might take a leading role in all this. And community of learning. Learning is not just a top-down or one-way process. It's a community of learning where every relevant stakeholder should participate. So it should be all about building the community of learning. Okay, the Confucius said some 2,500 years ago, what is education and learning? And he said this, and in Chinese and including Korean, traditionally we read from right to left, unlike English from left to right. And some people say that it's related with right brain and left brain. And I heard that Hebrew reads from right to left. So right brain and left. Okay. That's interesting. Anyway, so we read from right to left here. In Korean pronunciation, it says 교학상장. 교 means teaching. 교 means teaching. The first letter means teaching. And 학 means learning from students. And 상 means mutual. It's interactive. And 장 means growth. So education is the community for mutual growth between teachers and students. This is my final slide. You know, this Friday morning, the General Assembly, they will start with these speeches from, you know, the world leaders around the world. More than 130, you know, presidents and prime ministers and so on will participate in this year's, you know, UN General Assembly, because this UN General Assembly adopts Sustainable Development Goal. So we are moving into the new dimension of globalization. And the very first speaker, keynote speaker, is Pope Francis. And to me, it's very interesting to note that this Pope Francis' new encyclical is wrapping up his discussion with the importance of education. So education is very critical to make all this happen. Our efforts in education will be inadequate and ineffectual unless we strive to promote a new way of thinking about human beings, life, society, and our relationship with nature. Thank you.
I must admit, I feel a little bit more comfortable today with these topics because it's getting closer to medical, clinical, and psychological features than yesterday. You know, human cannot not learn. It's impossible. Following this definition of Bandura, one of the famous psychologists, second half of the last century, learning means changes of behavior over time. We can ask the question, what works? What works to improve learning, the process of learning? And this has been done. This question has been answered since 2 or 3 years. We know empirically. 800 meta-analyses, 50,000 single studies, 80 million students included. The largest study ever done just to answer this single question. What works? What is neutral? And what is not helpful? The statistical measure to do this is the so-called effect size. An effect size is a statistical measure. It's measured in 1.0. The difference between an intervention and the standard procedure. So if you have an effect size of 1.0, your intervention is as strong as one standard deviation stronger than the conventional stuff. If you have an effect size ES of 0, it doesn't matter whether you do it or not, it's the same. If you have an effect size which is negative, you better don't touch. Okay? That's the way you look at it. If you have an effect size of 0.2 to 0.4, it basically reflects the general development of human beings anyway. So you can do it or you cannot do it. Just depends. If it's something above 0.4, you will have to look closer, because then it gets really empirically relevant. If you do this, and John Hattie did this, it's out there. I'm going to present tomorrow some data on it. You find out that there's 136 variables coming out of this whole bunch of research, trying to ask the question, what works? And out of the 136 variables, you can distinguish between two basics. One is more personal, interpersonal variables, and the other one is more institutional socioeconomic variables. Just keep in mind what works. Is it more changing the institutions, socioeconomics, or is it more changing the personal or interpersonal stuff? And you know what comes out? You can challenge that, but it's 500 meta-analysis, okay? It's the largest ever done. Personal and interpersonal variables outperform institutionals by factor 2. Meaning any knowledge, any knowing about personal and interpersonal processes in the learning curve are much more important in institutional settings and socioeconomic ones. You can even end up with the statement, we don't need more money, for example, for classrooms or for IT. We need a completely different design following these findings. So what's important is that the instructor sees the topic through the eyes of the student, and the student starts seeing the topic through the eyes of the mentor. Keri calls it visible learning, conscious learning. This is one of the reasons why historical attempts to increase learning through the so-called constructivistic approach. This was basically in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, the approach. Saying, okay, we have a bunch of students out there, just set up an enriching environment, and they're going to find out themselves what's the best. It's not working. It's only working for preschooling. You can put a 3 to 4-year-old in an enriching environment, and then she or he is figuring out the best for himself. Preschooling, below 5. The older the pupil, the student is getting, the more direct instructions, drill, feedback, and self-evaluation he needs in order to improve his learning curve. Thank you very much.
I want to go back to the point that you raised around professors becoming conscious and the purpose of education is becoming open to oneself. And I want to say that most of the lecturers and researchers and professors that I know who are trying to do that are taking huge risks in the way that universities are currently structured. And that it is actually putting them in the way of harm to do that. Because universities, as they are currently configured, are hostile to openness, vulnerability, self-disclosure, the development of self. The most risk-taking and open professors I know are the ones who have left universities and have decided that these are no longer places to work in. And so what I was thinking about yesterday, and in response to this, was really this question of, are universities and our existing educational institutions the right place to start in thinking about a new paradigm of education, thinking about development of consciousness, because they have become hostile places to the self and to vulnerability, amongst other reasons. And I was thinking about the metaphors that we were using yesterday, and I remember the metaphor of the out-of-control car, the kind of feeling of panic. There's this thing that's going, and we're out of it, and unless somebody gets a grip on it, we're going to be in trouble. And I think underpinning that is a sense of education and learning as scarce. This idea that millions of people are going to need an education and we can't deliver this without losing GDP and going bust. And I wonder if this is the most helpful metaphor to be starting with. After all, the idea of scarcity, of learning as something that can only be done in institutions, I mean, the production of false ideas of scarcity is at the heart of neoliberal economics, which is one of the things we're trying to think our ways out of. So I wonder if we can think ourselves whether that's helpful. as Stefan has just said, learning is a fundamental human practice. It is what we do. We cannot avoid doing it. And so I was thinking about these words, learning and community, and I just thought it's helpful to put back into this conversation the work of community-based and participatory learning thinkers. So people like Ivan Illich, or John Holt, Paulo Freire, Gandhi, Bell Hooks, the schoolboys of Barbiana. And these traditions of education say education institutions are part of the problem. They are mechanisms that encourage people to think that they cannot educate themselves and that the knowledge they have is not worth having. Arguably, these traditions say that education institutions should be seen for what they are, as institutions that serve the needs of the professionals within them, and increasingly today of the corporations who own them. And arguably, the purpose of educational institutions, this perspective would say, is to tell people that they cannot survive without them, and to create an impression of scarcity and a lack which only they can fill. It's not a surprise that Arnold Toynbee, a professional academic, should say that universities should lead the way. We need to remember the positions that people are speaking from. In contrast, the traditions of community and participatory learning say, with some caveats, that it is possible to construct within communities the conditions for people to learn and to educate themselves, to ask questions about how the world is formulated, and to build knowledge and seek out insights about this. Now, there is criticism of this approach. It comes from people like Michael Young, who talk about the impossibility of generating powerful knowledge in these settings. The criticism of community-based learning is, well, where's your trip to the moon? When did you ever get a Large Hadron Collider out of community-based and participatory learning? To which we might respond, do we need a Large Hadron Collider? In the history of humanity, has this sort of approach given us greater peace, security, and well-being? So, I don't have time to talk through all of this in detail. There is a very long and substantial tradition, but I want just to ask ourselves, is the search to create learning communities in our existing institutions starting from the wrong place? Perhaps we should recognise that communities already exist, and they support learning, and they are abundant. So how do we get behind them, rather than seeking to professionalise and replace them? Should we be operating from a mindset of scarcity, or a mindset of abundance? And I wonder, yesterday Keri was talking about, if life is the goal, should learning be separated from life? And I go back to Aristotelian notions of theory and practice, and his concept of praxis as the constant relationship between being in and reflecting on the world. And skole, the original idea of school, comes from the root of leisure, of reflection. This is a very different mindset from this stressed and anxious striving for control because we don't think we can do it if we leave people to their own devices. And actually, skole relates precisely to Hattie's concept of visible learning. It is precisely about the student seeing through the eyes of the master and the master seeing through the eyes of the student. So, really all I want to say is, when we're thinking about creating learning communities, where should we start? What is our belief in the capacity of communities themselves to learn? And are we starting from the wrong place with our institutions? We need to recognise that all the evidence suggests that our current institutions, when they are universal, increase rather than decrease inequalities. So what is it that we're trying to achieve here, and where are we starting?
Thank you, Keri.